I'm here to talk about 2024. And when you say that out loud, like 2024, it sounds like this distant year in the future. Does anyone still have that vibe? But it's like a couple months away, and that doesn't make any sense to me. But it's actually, 2024 is interesting because it's the 25th anniversary of me getting my first job. So when I was a teenager, I was a concessionist at a movie theater. I am the best at popcorn in this room. There's no question. But how many of you got your first job on the front line? Maybe last year, many years ago in some cases, right? And I was a really good concessionist. So I quickly became a supervisor, then I became a manager, and I ultimately spent about 15 years managing and working with frontline teams both in movie theaters and in theme parks. And when I reflect back on that time, so much has changed, right? I was kind of at the advent of social media and mobile technology and e-commerce, and all of the many ways people experience our brands today are so much different. But then when I talk to frontline practitioners like yourselves and visit frontline locations, and even just as a customer going out and about engaging with frontline employees, I recognize that there's a lot that hasn't changed, right? Frontline work is still really hard. Managers still play this critical role in the experience of a frontline employee. Customers are still demanding, maybe more demanding than ever, right? And ultimately, our ability to execute our strategies as organizations still relies on our frontline team's ability to execute. So now, as we see the types of transformation Carol talked about, and the workplace continues to evolve, the question becomes, with industry trends and macroeconomic factors and technology and AI, how do we bring our frontline teams along for the journey with us so that what we call transformation doesn't become disruption to them? And that's what I want to talk about in our first AxoniCom 2023 panel. So please join me in welcoming our panelists, Jessica Lee, Senior Vice President of Global Talent Management at Marriott, Cris Harper, Vice President of Talent Experience at Giant Eagle, and Dani Johnson, co-founder and principal analyst, RedThread Research. So let's dive right in. I want to start off, learning a little bit about your organizations and the work that you do, but with the question around how you see the current state of frontline work. So Jessica, if we can start with you, how would you describe the kind of current state of frontline work within the work that you're doing at Marriott?
Well, I think everyone probably is experiencing that. We've been through a lot of change over the past few years, but I don't want to go to a doom and gloom space. I'm actually quite optimistic around the current state of frontline work. We've had lots of hiring that's been happening in our hotels, people who are interested in getting into our industry after it's experienced some bruises. And so I'm actually quite optimistic about all the new workforce that we have and the work that we'll do to retain them and have them fall in love with us.
Awesome. Cris, how about you?
We've had about the same. We've had a lot of hiring going on. We've been able to attract some really great talent, but we also still have some really long-term team members. I mean, we just had people celebrating 55 and 57 years with the company, so we're hoping that we can continue to attract them. I think the challenge is going to be retaining, and that's what we're really focusing on as we move forward.
If you don't know, Cris and Giant Eagle are located in the Pittsburgh area, and I am originally from Philadelphia in Pennsylvania, which means I'm not allowed to like Cris, or they won't let me back in the city. Just how sports works. Dani, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I look at it from a broader perspective, not from an individual organization perspective, but I guess the one word that I would use to describe it right now is frenetic. There's so much energy surrounding it and so many technologies that are sort of surfacing and so many organizations that are worried about the experience of their frontline. I find it really promising and hopeful, on top of being very, very frenetic.
So to follow up on that, Dani, your team's done a lot of research this year into the frontline experience and frontline technology, and the research report that you dropped was called Getting Real About the Frontline Workforce. And I'm curious, what findings in your research led you to add the subtitle to that report, which is, it's not as bad or as good as you might think?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, because when we started the research, we're like, well, yeah, everyone's talking about it. There's all this energy out there. Obviously, something's going on. And then we did the lit review. So every research project we do, we look at least 50 articles and kind of see what's out there and what's going on. And what we found was that the lit review, the literature didn't really back up the narrative that we were hearing out there. So we read all kinds of articles about, we're all in trouble, there aren't any frontline workers, everyone's miserable. But when we looked at the actual research, and then when we went and did our own research, we found that frontline workers are very much like the rest of the workers in our organizations as far as being able to do the things that they need to do. So our data didn't back up that there were huge differences between the frontline population and the rest of the population that works in organizations. They were very much similar. And we found that there are some really specific strengths that Frontline has that can actually be leveraged across the organization that no one was paying attention to. So there was lots of really good news there, along with some of the challenges that I'm sure you two have been seeing as well, and in ways that we need to address that Frontline. So that's why the tagline.
Gotcha. So I often talk about enabling frontline teams as a really complex math problem because there's so many people doing so many different types of work, and I've yet to meet the learning and HR function that just has all the time and all the money. So it's this interesting math challenge. And from a Marriott perspective, let's talk about scale and complexity for a second. So you have hundreds of thousands of employees across hundreds of locations, across multiple brands, all of which have different levels of service standards and expectations. And then add on top of that, you likely have many associates who maybe haven't experienced that service standard, haven't experienced the Marriott brand, or maybe have never been to a hotel before. So the question becomes, how do you enable your teams to execute the types of service we're seeing here? Because I've been here all week and I've been having a great time. The staff has been amazing. So my question really comes down to, how do you do that?
How do we do that? Yeah, so we've got 850,000 associates around the world, 80% are frontline, right? So massive population. One thing I'd be remiss to mention is we are at a JW Marriott hotel, which is named after our founder, J. Willard Marriott. And he has this very famous line that you'll probably hear in a lot of our hotels around the world, which is, if you take care of your associates, they'll take care of the customer, and the customer will keep coming back. And the reason why I bring that up is because for me, part of this is an answer around culture. I think with that line as a bedrock, and you hear people, regardless of whether it's in some tertiary city in China or here in Nashville perhaps, they'll say that, and it's so deeply rooted in our culture around we're going to take care of people first. And for me, what that translates to is really trying to build confidence in our associates so that they can be their most proud, empowered self, full of mutual respect when they're walking into a hotel and engaging with a customer that might live a very different life from them. But cultural also means that we translate it into certain processes or certain norms. So just a quick example to paint the picture is if you're opening a brand new hotel, and we're opening one hotel every day right now, you likely have this process where we're counting down to open the hotel. And you would bring all of the associates into a room like this, for example, where some of them may be sitting in the chairs that you're sitting on. But just as an example to how we build their confidence to get them ready to engage with customers, you might have a catwalk type of opportunity that takes place where they're literally coming onto the stage as a catwalk to show off their uniform, to make them feel good about what it is they're about to embark on. And then you multiply, a practice like that across many different touch points. And our hope would be that they are full of confidence because we're putting them first culturally, and then we're doing fun things to make them feel great about what it means to work for us. So just some examples like that.
I think confidence, in addition to capability, is going to be a theme that comes up in a lot of our conversations because equal parts to the equation, right? You might know what to do, you might know the process, but do you have the confidence to make the right decision in the right moment, especially in a particularly challenging moment?
Absolutely.
So Cris, one of the things that came up in our research at Axonify, came up in Dani's research at RedThread, is this idea of the importance of stability, given that, as I kind of mentioned, what we call transformation can often just become pure out change and disruption to the frontline workforce if we don't bring them along and involve them in the conversation. So I'm curious, at Giant Eagle, how do you emphasize stability in the way that you design the frontline experience and enable your frontline teams?
Yeah, stability is different now to what we used to experience in the past. It was stability of employment, benefits, compensation. They were truly the foundation. We've shifted now to try and make that stability focused on the experience. So whether I'm working in the cash on front end, whether I'm back in the warehouse, no matter what information I have access to, it's all the same. So giving them equitable access to information. It's also looking at, as I invest in them, what does that career path look like? Do they all have the same opportunity to grow? Do they all have the same opportunity to learning programs? And then I think on the flip side of that, when we look at the technologies that they're using, are they simple enough to enable them to do the work that they need to do on a regular basis without getting in the way? I think a lot of transformation happens to our frontline team members, and that's a big risk because you can lose them from a disengagement standpoint. So focusing on stability now around giving equitable experience and making sure that it's familiar every day that they come in, it really has made a difference to our engagement.
So along with stability, I think another interesting theme that came up in all of the Frontline research we've reviewed is autonomy. So I know that at Disney, it was always a struggle and a balancing act to say, you can do what's right for the guest to a certain extent, right? And that extent kind of changed the barriers and the kind of the bumpers. Let's use a bowling analogy. Does anyone else have a bowling injury, by the way, from last night? I'm actually injured, and I lost. So there's no fruit to that. But anyway, so this idea of how do you enable people to make the right decision and autonomously do their work, but at the same time drive consistency, especially when you have so many locations and so many associates. So Jessica, interested to get your perspective on how you enable autonomy across the various Marriott brands.
Yeah, so I'm going to use an example related to one of our brands, the Ritz-Carlton, and I'll use it because I think it is a catalyst for how we might think about it in some of our other hotels. So we talk about the concept of empowerment all the time, and we put some teeth behind the idea of empowerment with a policy, but it's not really a policy that matters. And what it is this idea that any individual in our Ritz-Carlton hotels, any of our ladies and gentlemen, are empowered to spend up to $2,000 a day to solve a guest problem or to delight a guest. And that dollar amount doesn't actually matter. It's really just the concept of, we trust you, we believe that you are going to do smart things, take care of our guests in the right way, and it's something that is so deeply rooted in that brand. But having a policy and saying, go spend $2,000 a day to solve a guest problem or make them happy, isn't enough in and of itself. And so to get to that consistency, one of the things that you'll see that we do is that we have a daily lineup meeting or a daily huddle, like many of your brands and companies probably do. And so in that setting, there's a lot of storytelling that happens. For example, every Monday, every Friday, we talk about wow stories. What are things hotels have done to really, take that concept of empowerment and bring it to life for a guest? And I think it's with that steady drumbeat coupled with the idea of a policy of empowerment that really gives people the ability to have autonomy, but also for us to get consistency because they hear it every single day about how others are doing it, which hopefully should inspire them to, go that extra mile themselves as well.
I want to build on that narrative of trust just to say that Jessica just trusted all of you with that insight into Marriott's guest recovery policy. Do not abuse the trust.
I'm trusting you to have appropriate expectations. Yes, yes.
So Cris, I want to drop a number on you. It's the most challenging number I've read in any of our Frontline research, and it's that 39% of Frontline employees feel heard. So that's a low number. And what's even more challenging is when we look at our reports year over year, that number was 59% in 2021. So we see a significant drop off in that idea that I am more than a number. I am a meaningful part of this organization. So how do you make sure people feel heard on the front line, again, given the math problem and the scale that we're talking about?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that there's one solution for that. I know that we struggle at Giant Eagle in the spirit of trust as well. We've just done our Voice of the Team Member survey. Thankfully, we are a little bit higher than industry. We're actually at a 60% likelihood to recommend and sense of belonging. So that was a hard one task. We did this survey 2 years ago when I just joined the organization, and we were at -14. That journey has been a hard one. That journey has been trying to figure out how we get in front of them when they don't have an email address, when they don't have time to talk to you, when you go in and ask them questions. They didn't have training. They didn't have a vehicle to give us feedback. And it was about finding the right technology to say, no matter where you are, if you have 2 minutes of time, give me just a yes or a no. How are you doing today? How are you feeling? Do you enjoy your work? The survey is an annual opportunity, but pulsing in between gives us the ability to check and see, we heard you on an annual basis. Now we're going to say we're going to commit to make these changes, and we're actually making the changes. But that's just one element of being heard. I think there's another element of, I had a really rough day today, and I need 5 minutes with my store leader to decompress and say, I had a rough day. It's equipping our leaders with the capability and the skills to also say, okay, this isn't for me to solve. This is for me to be there and to hear and support my team member. So trying to change and transform the culture is a lot of where we've invested. We're seeing change. Have we solved it? Not completely. Is it going to change in 6 months? Yes, and we'll have to find new solutions. But I think we've gone a long way to finding a solve for that.
Awesome. Let's build on that. And one of my favorite frontline-oriented themes is, and I mentioned before, the role of managers. Because having spent half my life as a frontline manager, I've seen how a great manager can make an okay job a good experience, and how a bad manager, however you define that, can make a good job unbearable. So I'll ask each of you, but I'll start with you, Dani. How do you see, or what have you seen in terms of the role that managers play and how organizations are thinking about enabling and focusing on managers, given the importance that they play in the lives and the career experiences of frontline workers?
Yeah, it's really weird. We've been following this exact question for years because we do a little bit of research on managers in general. And before the pandemic, so many leaders would come to me and they'd say, "Oh man, our frontline managers are just messing up. They're a mess. We need training to fix these frontline managers." During the pandemic, we put so many new responsibilities on managers. So many new responsibilities. They were now counselors, and we were trying to figure out all kinds of logistical problems that we had never figured out before, and everybody got burned out really super fast. And what organizations started to realize is that the managers don't suck. The organizations that are supporting the managers actually kind of suck. We aren't doing what we can to support the managers so that they can do all these things, especially the extra things that we've been asking them to do from the pandemic. And those expectations that we sort of set during the pandemic haven't actually gone away. So we've just piled this on, and we continue to expect our managers to do it. And it isn't until about a year and a half ago where we've actually seen organizations kind of wake up and say, we really have to address this in a different way. We've got to figure out how to take the stupid work off managers' plates and automate things and make it easier for them to communicate with people and all of these things that we never, ever did before. And I find that, again, my theme for today is sort of hopeful. I find it hopeful that we're seeing some technologies come out that can help with that, and mindsets come out that are actually gonna change that narrative a little bit.
Cris, how does your team think about the challenge of enabling great managers?
For us, and I don't know if Jessica sees the same thing, but we ask a lot of our store leaders in terms of reporting and updates. They are our communication channel, they are our performance channel, so there's a lot that we funnel through them. I absolutely agree that we, as a supporting function, have probably made that harder for them. So our focus right now is how do we take away the noise? How do we make sure that the reporting is automated? How do we leverage technology to make sure that things are delivered into their hands so they don't have to go get it? And then how do you simplify that conversation? So instead of giving them a wealth of reports, it's here are the 3 things I need you to share with your team this week about your numbers, and trying to clear the path so that they can actually care about their team. They're a leader because they want to lead people, not sit in front of spreadsheets and a desk. And I think we've complicated that. I think we make it harder for them to get out there.
It's so interesting hearing you say that, because I didn't know you were going to take the answer that way, but there's a ton of parallels. Like we hear from our managers all the time, there's all these initiatives coming from corporate, and I have to be on these webinars, I have to fill out this checklist of things to verify that I've done it. So I think I agree, we've made their jobs quite hard. I was going to share maybe a few other bits as far as the way that we're thinking about managers. So I think Carol mentioned this at the start, but we've had to do things to catch up, for example, around how managers are paid, for example, and trying to make sure that we're incentivizing them in the best possible ways. But separate from that, I think for us, there's 2 things we've really been focused on. One is how do we help bring flexibility into a role? Because I think the expectations of what managers today on the front line expect, and some of this is generational, some of it is just sign of the times, their expectations are different. In an environment like this, you may have managers who want to, let's say, work a shift that could be non-traditional, or have the flexibility to work remotely part of the time, which is hard in an environment that's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But we're trying to get creative with that. I think the other thing that for us is really important that we're putting a huge focus on in the 2024 year ahead of us is really for like that next crop of people who are coming up into manager roles. How do we really ready them for what to expect? Because I don't know if this happened to you, know it maybe happens in some of your organizations where you're really good at your job as a frontline associate, and then we throw you into, you're going to be a supervisor, a lead, a manager, like welcome to the show. And how often are we really equipping them with all of the skills and support that they need as a new manager, but also just like reality of what you're going to have to expect as a new manager. And I think it was kind of like a little bit of a light bulb for us, which I'm almost embarrassed to say because we've been around for 90 plus years, that like we have organically built people's careers up and given them tons of opportunity, but are we really preparing them in earnest to be able to tackle what it means to be a manager? And some people might not actually want the role once they have a great sense of what it is and what it entails. And so some of it is, readiness, awareness, and then making sure they've got the right skills. But we're just starting that journey to really put a focus on that next year. But that's a big part of it for us.
Yeah, I can relate to that on two levels. One, when my first frontline management job, I was scheduled for the training for being a frontline manager about 8 months after I became a manager. So what was I doing for 8 months? And then in another management job, I was not scheduled for training. I went on my days off. And one of those classes was called Leading in a Unionized Environment.
Oh.
I was leading in a unionized environment without having taken the training for leading in a unionized environment. I'm still here. Anyway, Dani, I need your help with something.
Sure.
I don't know if you all know this, but we're in danger right now of passing an important line, because if you're a technology company and you go 25 minutes without talking about AI, it knows. So Dani, can you just solve this whole AI thing for us right now? And just how are you seeing AI, specifically generative AI, impact employee experiences, all the kind of different elements of employee experience, and anything related more specifically to the frontline?
Yeah, this is everyone's favorite question right now, and I'm so tired of answering it, but I'm going to answer it for you all. Yeah, it's a big deal. As you probably realize, around March of last year, something happened and it clicked that this was going to change the way that we work and the way that we can work. It's going to change the back end, it's going to change the front end, it's going to change everything. Just a few examples of some of the things that I'm seeing right now that organizations are starting to think through. The first one is safety, figuring out how to do this safely, both from a physical standpoint, but also from a legal and psychological safety and mental aspect. So they're trying to think through safety. The second thing we're hearing a lot about is skills. Gen AI allows us to understand the skills in our organization better than we currently understand the skills. Most organizations, especially for the frontline, they base whether or not somebody has a skill on the type of job that they're currently doing. And as you all remember, during the pandemic, that caused all kinds of issues because some jobs went away and we had all these skills and we didn't understand what those skills are. But we're seeing technology hook into the work tech manufacturing system, for example, and they can tell, safety issues associated with that operator on that system or how quickly they get it done. We talked to an organization, it's actually, I don't know if I can say their name, so I won't, but it's a healthcare organization in Utah. And what they're doing is actually using medical coding information to understand the skills that nurses have. So if they do it a number of times very frequently, then they say that that person has that skill. And once we have that information about skills, we're able to do lots of really good things. The first thing is that we can train our individuals and help them understand where they can go in the organization, which is a big conversation right now for Frontline. The second thing that we can do is we can do all kinds of things with scheduling and cross-training that we currently can't do. So if you can imagine, there's one organization that we talked to that has technology in place that can actually stop somebody from being scheduled if they don't have the skills associated with that. Once they understand the skills, then they can put people wherever they need in order to make that happen. And then the third big thing that we're seeing is learning. Everybody wants to learn and grow and develop, and this is one of the biggest places that Gen AI dipped in first in the HR technology, is helping individuals understand what they could do if they had the skills and then develop the skills based on consolidating all that information and pointing them to the right opportunities regardless. Is that a good enough summary?
Is everyone good now on AI?
Very good.
All right.
Just to comment on the AI front, I feel like this is something we've been talking about internally at Marriott, which is, to bring it back to the whole confidence topic. I think that it has the potential to be so intimidating for our frontline or even for any of us, right? And I think the reality is we've actually all been doing AI for quite a long time. And I think that that's actually, a piece to the conversation that we're trying to dial up, which is it's not new. It is new, but it's not that new. Just to help people feel comfortable with, oh, wait a minute, there's all these examples of things that we've been doing, whether it's related to translations or before I was in this role, I did a lot in the talent acquisition space and we're doing things with AI there. And so I just think it's so important when we think about like for that front line and the confidence we want to breed in them, how to make them feel like more comfortable with like, it's around, it's not that bad. There's things that are going to help make your job easier, which I think sometimes is getting lost in the conversation.
Absolutely. There's a bit of FOMO in the AI space right now.
Yeah.
So grounding it in that conversation of the evolution of technology as opposed to, oh my gosh, new thing. Yeah. And then people not quite knowing how to evolve their strategy and just developing fear around it without really understanding how this is a meaningful evolution as opposed to a sudden and violent change that it can look like, but I don't believe it to be. So.
I think there's a sort of another aspect of that, and it's that Gen AI is accessible to everybody. It's accessible to everyone in the room, and it's being integrated into our technology whether we know it or not, right? So it's popping up places, and I think that is the one big difference between this and, say, blockchain, which nobody understands, is people are still trying to figure out what to do with it because nobody understands. People are experimenting like crazy with Gen AI. I experiment every day with Gen AI because I want to see what it can do. And as that happens, organizations do get a little bit more comfortable with it, and people on the front line even get a little bit more comfortable with it. And I think it's going to maybe accelerate a little faster than some of these other technologies that we've seen because of that, because it is very, very accessible.
And a clear utility in very specific applications, right?
For
Because
sure.
Just for me, like about 70% of the images I use in presentations are now AI generated. And I have an AI clone of my voice. So if you're in a meeting with me and you can't see me, am I there?
Is it you?
Now you're wondering. Let's kind of take it to the almost extreme opposite of AI and take it to something we've mentioned a little bit around empathy for the frontline experience. So you mentioned, Jessica, how a lot of people kind of good at the job and then become managers of people in the job. But there's also a lot of people who are in different parts of the organization who've maybe never done the job, or maybe it's been a long time since they did the job. And I know one of the, I think, smartest things I've ever done in my career is when I went into management and learning and development at Disney, I put the costume back on regularly. So I would go back into Big Thunder Mountain Railroad and operate Big Thunder Mountain Railroad, or put the whites on and go back into custodial shifts. Because one, it built trust with the teams that I was working with, but two, it just reminded me what the world is like and the world that I'm supporting is like. So how do you foster that empathy within teams that maybe have people who have never experienced what it's like to do frontline work, or maybe it's just been a bit and things have changed, or they don't remember what it's like?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we can do all sorts of things. And I think some of these things are important, related to making sure people have good data to understand what's going on with the frontline, or just even who is the frontline. We can do things like create personas all day long to, help paint the picture of for whom we're in service to. But at the end of the day, I really think there's no substitute to what you're saying of getting back out there or getting in there to help, just get in the shoes of that frontline worker. And so, there's little things that we talk about, within Marriott around if I'm at a hotel and I'm a corporate person or I'm a, manager, how do I make sure, for example, I could go eat at a restaurant at the hotel for lunch that day, or I could go to the cafeteria and sit with, the associates and have lunch in the same place that they're having, just to hear the conversation, be in their shoes, and understand, what's going on with them. And I think there's really great data around, this idea of being in the front line, because, there's research that's been done around how the best decisions get made, and especially in the types of organizations we work in, the best decisions get made when you are closest to the transaction. The further up in the food chain you are, the more removed you are from the actual frontline and transactions, the worse your decision making is. And so, there's catalysts like that for me that are just so powerful that tell us you got to get in there in order to see it, feel it, and can't just sit back and assume that the way it's been for the past 20 years is really the same.
Cris, another thing that's near and dear to my heart, the conversation around cross-training. Yeah. So Sorry to keep using myself as examples, but when I was at Disney, I wanted to become a manager as quickly as I could. And the way that I did that was I cross-trained my way into every possible role that I had access to, so that on paper, I was the most capable human being on the planet. So there was no way they weren't going to promote me. So I've experienced the kind of career-building value of having the opportunity to do different types of things in the workplace. So I'm curious how your team thinks about cross-training and the value to the associate as well as the value to the business.
Cross-training is honestly something that we're still trying to tackle. For us, we have very defined roles in the grocery store. People find their routines and they love what they do, and they've done it for 55 years. So there's a pool of talent in our stores that sees cross-training as scary, that sees it as something that they don't understand, they probably don't want to do, and they don't really know what the value is for them. So we're in the process of actually building career pathing to help them understand the value of what that means to them. The fact that you may have been working in the deli for the last 15 years and you love it and you know, but have you thought about what those skills from a guest interaction standpoint could do to serve you in cash? So it's about removing some of the fear on transitional skill sets and helping people understand true crossover capabilities, and then backing that up with cross-training. The AI piece that you were talking about, for us, it's about trying to understand correlation. So looking at our training suite and understanding, we have 50 different learning programs that are specific to different roles. Which ones can we remove, or which ones can we highlight and say, you're actually going to do one instead of 5 different courses? And the AI is helping us understand some of that crossover or building the learning plans around that. I think the value to the organization is immense. We are all challenged to fill our shifts. I don't think there's probably somebody in this room that can say, you know what, I'm fully staffed and our shifts run smoothly and I get all the work done that I need to get done in a day. It doesn't happen. We're being asked to do more with less. Cross-training is the solution for an organization. But I also see that cross-training capability, if not handled correctly, could actually destabilize your engagement for your team members. So yes, it's a benefit to an organization. You can move people around the stores. You can fill spots where maybe you don't have someone in the deli and you have to close the deli. Well, if I move you into the deli, then I can keep the deli open, but then my safety risk has gone through the roof because they've actually never used a deli slicer. They don't understand what cut gloves are. So it's a trade-off to try and figure out where the safe balance is. I don't think we've worked it out yet, but we're on that journey.
Great points, great points. We talk a lot about retention when it comes to frontline employee experiences. And when we look at our research over and over, there are 2 things that stand out in terms of drivers of retention. Why do people stay in frontline roles? And those 2 things are people are significantly more likely to stay when they like the people they work with and they trust their manager. Those 2 things ring over and over again. So Dani, I'm interested in the research you did. You really called out community and an investment in the community around the frontline experience as a key driver of that experience. So I'm interested to hear more about that.
Yeah, it was kind of a surprise to me, actually, that investment in the community made that much difference, but it does. It makes a very large difference in how that organization is perceived in the community, but also the trust that the community has in the company. We saw all kinds of sort of instances of this. So one healthcare organization, for example, offered community health. We've seen sponsorship of local baseball teams and football teams. We've seen education. A lot of these larger organizations are not just educating the individual, they're actually educating the family or offering, and all of that is investment into the community, which makes the community stronger and provides, in some cases, a bigger pool from which to draw from for the organization, so it's good for the organization. But more than that, it just builds this incredible trust. Oh, that organization is a good organization. I want to work for that organization. They believe in me. I believe in it. We have this sort of connection that feels like it has sort of faded over time in a lot of places. Like my dad did the 35 years at Bell Labs at AT&T and got the gold watch at the end, but that doesn't happen anymore. Except in some of these pockets with frontline workers and organizations. There still is such thing as a company town, as I'm sure you all understand and know. And that idea of trust is the biggest thing that we found. I trust you, you trust me, we have this partnership together.
And on the other side of the retention story, on the hiring story, Jessica, when we were preparing for this conversation, you mentioned that Marriott hires 200,000 people a year. So I'm curious what you're seeing in terms of kind of the skills that are coming through the door when you're hiring people today as compared to previous years? Are you seeing people coming in with past experience and relevant skills? Or are you seeing the need to train people up more into some of those foundational capabilities because maybe they haven't worked in this type of environment before, or maybe they just don't have a lot of professional experience at this point?
Yeah, I mean, 2022 was a high watermark for us of having to hire 200,000 people. So we'd never hired that many people in our life. And so the other thing that was at play, which I'm sure many of you have also experienced, is that people were a little bit more reticent to get into frontline roles. But we found the 200,000 people, and we're still hiring like crazy. But the profile of who we hired definitely changed. So less people with hospitality experience. And I think one of the things that we're also challenged by is, I don't know if any of you are in this boat, but maybe some of our technology, not Axonify, but outside of this, like let's say customer related technology, maybe isn't the most modern. We have this one system, for example, that we call Marsha. She is about 40 years old, and we use her at the front desk, and it's a green screen. So like imagine someone coming new to the industry, never seen that green screen, and also not expecting a green screen. And so there's a lot that we've had to do to internally be reflective on like, how do we make the lives of our frontline associates better with the tools that they have access to, but then also how do we train them up? And so we're probably just as guilty, maybe more guilty than others, around trying to cram a ton of stuff into that onboarding experience, whether it's what you need to know about our loyalty program, or what you need to know about your brand and service and safety and all the million things that people need to know. But then, that cadence of that every single day. What'll be interesting for us is that that cadence of daily learning for us happens through that live huddle, and we're in the process of implementing Axonify. And so we're going to have to figure out like, how do we shift some of that live huddle or complement it with, let's say, daily questions. But that workforce has been a bit different that we've had to train up, and we're not unaccustomed to it, though. I think what's interesting for us is particularly outside of the US, when we're entering into new markets where hotels are popping up and you have a bunch of talent that have not worked in the industry because it didn't exist on their island or whatever their city might be. And so we're really, we have a lot of thought and care that we put into how to groom people and get them up and running. But that daily touch point certainly is a big part of it. And we're just kind of in a place of how do we balance like the million things that we want them to know against what do they really need to know. So we're a little bit of a work in progress, which sounds surprising to folks given we've been around forever, but we're still working on some things.
Continuous improvement.
Yes, success is never final is what one of our founders always says. So that's kind of our rallying cry.
There you go. So, Cris, to extend that question to the seasonal hiring idea. So we talk a lot in retail and grocery about seasonal hires. It's very timely right now, heading into the holiday season. So what have you seen from a seasonal employee perspective, being able to attract people for seasonal roles and then upskill people to be able to perform in those jobs?
We honestly are challenged with trying to find the volumes that we need. So for us, it's about trying to get as many people to help us in the seasonal times as we can. We do that through a couple of different ways. We are really great at making sure that when people work with us, they have a great experience. So next year, I can call them and say, hey, we loved you last year. Do you want to come back? We do that a lot with college as well. We're having students come back to us. But honestly, it's about career fairs. It's about getting out there into the community and having that conversation face to face. We don't get the same number of applications anymore. And when we do, we call them and they've already got a job. And that may be 2 hours after they sent us their resume. So we've moved from having to go through a formal offer process to we meet you, we like you, we talk about the job, you think you're interested in it. Well, we're going to see you Monday. So we verbal offer them and do all of the paperwork and everything else behind the scenes to try and just make it as easy as possible to get people in. It's hard. But if you remove a lot of the barriers and try and focus on just engaging and making that connection to the people, we find that they'll turn up and we'll figure out the paperwork on the first day.
And I spent some time as a seasonal worker. I was a seasonal jungle cruise skipper. So if you need me to tell you 10 minutes worth of dad jokes at any point in the next 2 days, I can do that. I can't drive a boat though. It's on a track. Spoiler. So as we wrap up our conversation, this is the one thing question. So if everyone in the room could take one action in 2024 to improve their frontline experience for the betterment of the people we support, as well as the betterment of their business, what would that one thing be for you to recommend? Dani, I'll start with you.
I knew you were going to start with me. I think I would say start with what you have. A lot of organizations, especially in this frenetic energy space that we're in right now, have reached out to find new ideas or new systems and new processes that are, there are all kinds of things that are working really well on the front line. We just need to leverage them a little bit better. A lot of the people that we talked to, for example, talked about the stand-up meeting at the beginning of a shift and how that's underutilized a lot. It can be used for much more communication and education and all kinds of things. So the thing that I would recommend is just look at what you have and leverage it before you dive into anything else.
Cris, how about you?
Ooh, we should have connected beforehand because that was mine.
Oh, man,
but if I think on the fly,
Glad I went first.
I can get creative. I would say simplify. I think beyond using what you have, look at everything that you have that's in the way of people just getting to the work that they need to get to. Remove the noise, be super succinct in your communication, and just allow them to do their job.
Jessica.
So for me, I think the one thing I would want us to be thinking about is concept of micro moments. So I think we can, launch new technologies, have these big initiatives that we're all excited to roll out. But I think at the end of the day, it's really those micro moments for our workforce that make a difference. And I'll give you like a specific example that I keep talking about with all of our hotels to get them thinking about the little things that matter. So if you imagine you're a frontline worker, you accepted a job, you're going through orientation, and now it's time for you to get your uniform. Classically, probably what most folks do is either they're folded nicely or they're on a wire hanger, which is, kind of what you would expect. But like, how do you take those little moments and turn it into something really magical and memorable for them? So I saw one of our hotels do this so beautifully, which is why I keep talking about it, is they decided to take that moment of the uniform and turn it into what they might do if a guest asked them to help them with their dry cleaning. Because what happens in that moment is they package it nicely and they bring it to the room and it's a presentation. But imagine if you did that to your frontline worker to say, I value you and respect you just as much as I respect that customer who's paying however much they're paying to stay with us, and really taking those unexpected little moments to turn it into something really wonderful, which doesn't cost money, it's not an initiative you have to do, it's just being very thoughtful about the smallest of things that people don't expect.
That's a great example and a great place to wrap up our first conversation for AxoniCom 2023. And of course, I'd like to thank Jessica, Cris, and Dani for kicking off AxoniCom 2023. So thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for everything you do and everything all of you do to support your frontline teams. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your AxoniCom experience.